That dreaded written exercise. Let me share some gems with you guys today to help you out. Welcome back to the channel. If you're new here, my name's Simranjeet Mann. I'm a future trainee solicitor for a UK top 20 law firm who's actually going to be starting a training contract very soon. I think I've got a little over a month left. Since receiving 3 training contract offers, I've been providing advice to aspiring solicitors, as well as general careers tips and vlogging my journey along the way as well. As the title of this video suggests, we'll be talking about the written exercise today, which you will commonly find yourself completing during an assessment centre. I'll be sharing my experiences from every single written exercise that I've ever had to do, how you can prepare for yourself in these scenarios, and also how to perform best based on the specific situations and experiences that I myself have been in. Before I start, I want to remind you guys of Mindful Learning's assessment centre guides. I've talked about these e-guides quite often in one of my previous videos. If you're looking for further information about assessment centres in general, please do check out the Mindful Learning website and their e-guides via the link in the description below. If you decide to purchase the assessment centre guide, there will be a 35% discount if you use my code SIMS35 at the checkout. Further details about this are again in the description below. So now let's get to the crux of the video. Personally, the most common types of written exercises that I find are the ones where you're writing a letter of some sort. The usual ones that I've come across are where you're writing a letter to a client. However, you can also be faced in situations where you're providing a letter to a supervisor or a partner in your team. Let me talk about one specific written exercise that I had. So this was for a private client firm. They provided us a booklet which had all this information about the client itself, who they were, their situation, and also there was another page that detailed relevant legislation that was in relation to the client's situation. So we didn't have to kind of have that legal knowledge already there. They provided that for us already. And essentially this situation was quite wild with the client. So I think it was something to do with wills and the administration of her estate. She was quite a scandalous figure, a famous author or something that they said, and she essentially, you know, she had loads of affairs, loads of like illegitimate children. So her estate was literally here, there and everywhere, and essentially you were tasked with writing a letter of advice based on the information provided to you and the research and the legislation that's been provided to you as well. Now, one thing I'd like to say is I mentioned that this firm is a private client firm, and it just so happened that they also provided a written exercise that was based on private client. So one way in which you can actually prepare yourself for these kind of situations is knowing what the firm's key practice area is, because they may ask you to do a written exercise based on one of their key practice areas as well. Now, the next thing that I'd like to say for the letter of advice is consider your audience. So if you're writing to a client, you may be writing in a more formal manner, but look out for what the facts of the question tell you. So say if the facts of the question say that this is a client that you've known for a long time, therefore in your letter of advice you would say something like, "Hey John," or "Hi John." You'd be a lot more informal, and you'd probably ask them things like, "I hope your weekend went well," etc. However, if the facts tell you that this is the first time that you're interacting with the client, you'd be a lot more formal. You would say, "Dear Mary," and also you would introduce yourself in that first paragraph. So, "I believe we have not met before. I am a trainee at this firm working with John on this case. I'll be writing to you today about," and therefore you've kind of introduced yourself, and you've just, you know, I guess it's just those little things here and there, those little bits of detail that go to show to the assessor that you've taken that attention to detail in. Another thing I'd like to say, I guess this links to the point about considering your audience, is if you are writing a letter to a client, you don't want to include things like legal jargon, because that's something that a client might find difficult to understand. However, if you are addressing a letter or a memo, for example, to a member of your team, a senior lawyer, they have that relevant knowledge, so you can include that jargon in. Another point about attention to detail that I'd like to say is if the facts of the question tell you, for example, that the client was away on holiday last week in Italy, in your letter of advice, one thing you could mention is, "I hope you had a lovely time in Italy last week." So that's how you're taking the facts that's been provided to you and applying it to your written exercise, just to show the assessor that you have taken into account every single piece of detail. Now, salutations are also very, very important. If you're someone like me, in my old applications, I used to end my letters with kind regards. If you want to watch that video, here's the link above. And essentially, the correct salutation is absolutely vital. If you are addressing the letter to dear sir / madam, then you are ending the letter with yours faithfully. If you are directing the letter directly to someone, so dear John, you are ending the letter with yours sincerely. Also, please make sure during your letter that you've got spellings of names right, your grammar is correct, your punctuation is correct, because all of these things do play a part as well. In terms of structure for your letters, one thing that I like to do is actually make sure that every introductory sentence for a paragraph signposts the reader about what the rest of the paragraph will be about. And then if I want to make a new point, I make a new paragraph. So that's how I kind of approach my structure with these things as well. For written exercises, you are usually told by the law firm that you are not expected to show any legal knowledge. And this is true, this is fair, because of course there are people who are applying to law firms who haven't done law degrees, so that makes complete sense. However, when I was in my written exercises, I used to do them in person, remember, I wasn't really doing them virtually. When I was in the written exercise at the firm itself, if I remembered a certain piece of legislation or statute or case law that related, I actually tried to sometimes incorporate that in, because I knew I was 100% right on that, and I felt like it would add a little bit of detail about that extra background knowledge that I have. I'm not saying that this is something that you have to do or you have to show, but it is something that really helped me. If you don't have that requisite legal knowledge, that's completely fine, don't worry about it. It's not compulsory, it's just something that I used to do to add a bit of flavour to my written exercise. Similarly, if you've got business knowledge or knowledge about the firm, then you can also include that into your written exercise. For example, if the client expresses a certain issue and you can perhaps talk about another team that could help them with that issue or another initiative that the firm has done, then that just goes to show that you're taking that written exercise to the next level by incorporating your own firm research into it as well. So let's move on to the second type of written exercise that I've ever had to do, and this was actually writing a memo to a member of my team about a client's real estate and intellectual property issue. So there were two legal issues at play here. So one of the issues was about a lease, if I vaguely remember, and the other one was the same client but someone was copying their product, so that was the intellectual property side. I had to do this task from home, so this was actually before the assessment center stage, so I was able to rely on legal knowledge, I was able to search up things, I was able to research effectively and extensively. And one thing I would really say here was using headers effectively was really important, but also using a range of sources and then referring to them in my memo just to give the reader an idea about where I'd gained my sources from was very important for me in this task. In terms of researching, I used sources like Practical Law, I used Lexis, I think, if I remember correctly as well, and also a simple Google search really helped me in terms of familiarizing myself with the basic legal concepts as well. This next written exercise was actually quite different compared to other written exercises that I've done before. There was no link to the legal sphere at all. Essentially, I was acting like a head teacher of a school, and I received an angry complaint from a parent saying that I took their child's phone, and they were basically complaining about that. There was no other information provided, and at the start the assessor told me that I had the creative freedom to mention whatever I wanted. So here, because I had that creative freedom, I said that one of the reasons why we had to take the child's phone was because they were using it during a mock exam, and I then referred to a fake school policy where on page 57 it stated that the use of phones during a mock exam was not allowed and it would involve a one-day confiscation of the phone. I also then mentioned in the letter that I attached the school policy for your reference. The main thing with this task for me was not only just simple letter writing, so ensuring that I had the salutations correct. The main thing with this task was actually communicating to someone who was actually frustrated and was angry at you. So what I did was I used language in my letter like things like, I understand that you are frustrated because, or I apologize if this caused any inconvenience. So I just still maintained that politeness in respect of the fact that someone is angry at me. So I definitely reflected that in my language as well. The next written exercise is one that kind of relates to the firm, and you can get stuff like this, and this one was about me writing a report for the firm on where they should move their office in London. So they provided us a booklet which had 3 different office locations all around London, and each of those offices had their advantages and their disadvantages. They also provided us a separate sheet which had the kind of firm's objectives of, you know, where they wanted to move ideally, like how many people they had in the firm, whether they wanted to move to a firm, for example, that had cheaper overheads, etc. So all these details are provided, and of course some firms provided those objectives, whereas some firms didn't. And of course, when you were looking at the booklet, you realize that albeit one firm would have satisfied one objective, they may not have satisfied the other objective. So here with the task, it wasn't really about finding the right or wrong office. It wasn't about that. The main thing that was being assessed here was how you write, how you use data and research in front of you, and how you manipulate that data to be presented in a concise manner for someone to read. And of course, at the end, I had to provide things like a summary as well. One thing that I would really recommend for reports is familiarize yourself with the simple structure that lawyers actually use. So they use things sometimes like executive summaries. Another thing with this task was actually you should not be regurgitating the facts and the stats that they give you in that booklet. So I could have easily just repeated the same statistics that are provided in that booklet, but I didn't. Instead, I actually calculated things like the percentage difference between the head count of one office and the head count of another office. And that just goes to show that I'm taking that data and I'm applying it back to the question at hand and the report at hand. It's the same way as law, right? If you're given with certain facts or legislation or case law, you are expected to apply that back to the situation at hand. And that's what I did here when formulating this report as well. I think one thing that I could have done here as well to improve my report even further was actually incorporate my knowledge of the firm as well. So if I was aware that, for example, the firm had been at this particular office for a number of years, I could have incorporated that into my report. It would have just given me that extra edge, and the assessor would have known that I've done my research. This final task that I've been given is more of a drafting exercise that I was provided when I was at a law firm. Of course, there's a difference between drafting and writing, and usually grad recruitment do specify that in their email when they are inviting you to the assessment center. So essentially for these drafting exercises, what I've come across is when you are proofreading a contract or a lease, look out for things like spelling and grammar, names not being spelt correctly, headers not matching the contents page, for example. The numbering may be wrong, so do look out for little things like that when you are doing your drafting exercises. One thing that used to trouble me a little bit was the use of apostrophes, so do make sure you're revising your use of things like apostrophes, colons, semicolons, because this is where you'll really be tested on that in drafting exercises. Right, so that's literally every single written task or exercise that I've come across when I was in the application process. Hopefully this gives you a bit of an idea about what to expect. If you are watching this video and you've experienced something entirely different, or you'd want to add on to one of my points, please do write it in the comments below and help all of your fellow aspiring solicitors out. If you like my content, please like, comment, subscribe, all of that. It really means the absolute world to me. Thank you so much for watching.